The road into Mill Creek stretched long and empty, bordered by cornfields and silence. At night, the only movement came from passing headlights and the low rumble of trucks heading towards somewhere else. It was the kind of town people passed through, not the kind they noticed. Jacob Miller noticed it because it was home. For years, his life followed the same rhythm. Highways, rest stops, deadlines, and the hum of a diesel engine that never quite left his ears. When he pulled into his driveway after weeks on the road, the quiet felt earned. Predictable. Safe. Neighbors waved but rarely spoke. Everyone knew everyone, yet no one knew much at all. 2 houses down lived a man named Mark Reynolds. Friendly. Unremarkable. The kind of neighbor who helped shovel snow and smiled a little too easily. To Jacob, he was just another face on the block. Someone who existed only when Jacob was home. What Jacob didn't see were the hours when he was gone. The empty evenings. The conversations that stretched too long. The doors that closed quietly. On that road, under those streetlights, nothing ever seemed wrong. Until the night everything changed. Jacob and Emily's marriage hadn't collapsed all at once. It thinned slowly, like a rope fraying strand by strand. When they first married, Jacob promised the road would only be temporary. 1 more contract, 1 more year. But trucking paid well, and each mile meant stability, at least on paper. A house, bills paid on time, food on the table. Emily stayed behind, watching taillights disappear at dawn and return weeks later. Phone calls became shorter. Time zones made excuses easy. Jacob talked about traffic, schedules, repairs. Emily talked about the house, the weather, the quiet. Neither mentioned what they were really feeling. Loneliness doesn't shout. It whispers. Jacob believed love was endurance, working through exhaustion, sacrificing presence for provision. Emily believed love was closeness, something she could feel sitting beside her. Both thought the other understood. Neither did. As the miles grew longer, the space between them filled with something neither could name, until someone else noticed it first. Mark Reynolds moved in during one of Jacob's longer routes. 3 weeks across state lines. Barely enough time to notice a new mailbox when Jacob returned. Mark was in his late 30s, divorced and worked locally. He was home when others weren't. At first, he was just helpful. When Emily struggled with a broken fence latch, Mark appeared with tools before she even finished explaining the problem. When her car wouldn't start one morning, he was there with jumper cables and an easy laugh. Small things, neighborly things. But small things have weight when you're alone. Emily hadn't planned to talk so much. It just happened. Mark listened without glancing at his phone. He remembered details. He asked questions Jacob didn't know to ask anymore. Their conversations drifted from weather to memories, from memories to frustrations, and eventually to confessions that felt too heavy to carry home. Emily told herself it was harmless. Mark was just someone nearby, someone who noticed her. Even when Jacob was home, the habit had formed. Mark waved a little longer. Emily smiled a little more. Boundaries shifted quietly. One evening, during a storm that knocked out power on the street, Emily knocked on Mark's door for candles. They sat in the dark, rain pounding against the windows, talking until the storm passed. Emily returned home with more than candles. By the time Jacob sensed something was off, it was already woven into the routine of the neighborhood. Hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment it would no longer stay hidden. Jacob wasn't supposed to be home until Friday. A blown hose outside the city limits ended the trip early, forcing him to turn back just after midnight. He didn't call ahead. He liked surprises, the good kind. The kind where he pulled into the driveway and saw Emily's face light up, at least for a moment. The neighborhood looked the same as always. Dark. Still. Familiar. But something felt wrong. Emily's car wasn't in the driveway. At first, Jacob told himself there was a simple explanation. Maybe she'd gone to a friend's place. Maybe she'd stepped out for something small. But the unease tightened as he shut off the engine and stepped into the quiet. That's when he noticed the light. 2 houses down, Mark Reynolds' living room glowed softly against the darkness. A shape moved past the window, slow, unhurried, comfortable. Jacob didn't know why he started walking. He didn't remember deciding to. His boots hit the pavement without sound, his mind filling the silence with excuses he wanted to believe. He stopped beneath the window. The curtains weren't fully closed. Inside, Jacob saw his wife laughing, her head thrown back in a way he hadn't seen in years. She was barefoot, relaxed, at ease. Moments later, she disappeared down the hallway, followed by Mark. Jacob stood frozen, breath shallow, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The world narrowed to a single, undeniable truth. The house felt smaller, the air heavier. Jacob didn't shout. He didn't knock. He didn't go inside. He turned away. What he carried back to his truck wasn't anger yet. It was something colder, something settling deep in his chest. And in that silence, a decision began to form. Jacob sat inside the cab of his truck with the engine off. The dashboard lights glowed faintly, casting long shadows across the steering wheel. Outside, the neighborhood remained asleep, unaware that something irreversible was unfolding just a few yards away. For nearly 4 minutes, Jacob didn't move. Later, investigators would review nearby security footage and note the stillness. No phone in his hand, no pacing, no visible reaction. Just a man staring straight ahead, breathing slowly, as if trying to convince himself that what he had seen wasn't real. Memories came in fragments. Emily waving from the porch. Promises made in passing. The way she used to wait up no matter how late he returned. Each thought collided with the image burned into his mind, replaying without mercy. He felt humiliation first. Not the sharp kind, but heavy, suffocating. The kind that presses down on your chest and makes the world feel too small. Then came anger. Not explosive, focused. Jacob had spent his life controlling massive machines at high speeds, trusting himself to stay calm when others panicked. Control was his identity, his pride. In that moment, control twisted into something dangerous. Jacob turned the key. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence of the street. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the quiet road ahead. Straight, open, and unforgiving. Jacob didn't look back. He put the truck in gear and pressed the accelerator, aiming toward the house that held everything he'd just lost. What happened next would take only seconds, but it would define the rest of his life. The semi-truck surged forward, its weight impossible to ignore. The streetlights blurred as Jacob crossed the short distance between his driveway and Mark Reynolds' house. There was no swerving, no hesitation. At 2:17 a.m., the truck left the road. The front tires tore through the lawn, flattening the small fence Mark had installed just months earlier. The sound, metal, glass, and wood colliding, ripped through the quiet neighborhood like an explosion. The living room wall gave way instantly. Furniture was shoved aside as the truck's cab pushed deep into the structure, stopping only when the frame of the house resisted what the street could not. Windows shattered. An alarm screamed. Houses nearby shook as if struck by an earthquake. Inside, Mark and Emily ran. They escaped through the back of the house as dust filled the air, their feet barely touching the ground as they fled into the darkness. Neighbors later said they heard shouting, crying, then sirens. The truck finally went silent. Jacob turned off the engine and climbed down from the cab. His hands were steady, his face unreadable. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He sat on the curb across the street, staring at the damage. The house split open, the life he'd known reduced to wreckage. Within minutes, red and blue lights flooded the road. For the first time that night, Jacob looked up and waited. The first patrol car arrived less than 6 minutes after the impact, though to Jacob it felt much longer. The night air was thick with dust and the sharp smell of fuel. Splintered wood littered the street, and the exposed interior of the house glowed under flashing emergency lights like a wound that refused to close. Jacob remained seated on the curb. Officers stepped out cautiously, hands near their holsters, eyes moving from the crushed house to the semi-truck embedded in it, and finally to the man sitting quietly across the street. He didn't match the chaos around him. There was no panic in his posture, no attempt to explain or escape. One officer called out to him. Jacob raised his hands slowly, almost mechanically, as if following instructions he'd rehearsed long before this moment ever existed. They handcuffed him without resistance. As paramedics checked the house and neighbors gathered at a distance, questions began to form. But answers did not come easily. Jacob's gaze stayed fixed on the shattered living room, where a couch still sat upright, framed by broken walls and dangling wires. When an officer finally asked why he did it, Jacob paused. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "I just wanted him to feel what I felt. No anger, no shouting, just exhaustion." Emily stood wrapped in a blanket at the end of the street, her face pale under the flashing lights. Their eyes met for a brief second, long enough for years of shared life to pass between them without words. Then Jacob looked away. As he was led into the back of the patrol car, the crowd fell silent. The truck driver who once disappeared down highways now vanished behind a closing door. The road was quiet again. But nothing in Mill Creek would ever feel the same. The courtroom was nothing like the road Jacob had known his entire adult life. There were no open horizons, no movement, just walls, benches, and the slow grind of time. Jacob sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit, his hands folded tightly in front of him. The man who once commanded 40 tons of steel now waited for permission to speak, to stand, even to breathe too loudly. Prosecutors laid out the case with methodical precision. They showed photographs of the house split open like a toy, wooden beams snapped, personal belongings scattered beneath the weight of the truck. They replayed security footage of the semi accelerating, leaving the road, and slamming into the structure with unmistakable intent. This, they argued, was not an accident. It was a choice. Witnesses took the stand. Neighbors shaken awake by the crash. First responders describing the devastation. Officers recalling Jacob's calm surrender. Each testimony added another layer to the story, stripping away any remaining illusion that this was a momentary lapse. Then Emily testified. Her voice trembled as she spoke about the marriage, the distance, the loneliness she hadn't known how to name. She admitted to the affair without excuses, her eyes never leaving the floor. When asked if she believed Jacob intended to kill, she hesitated. "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't think he knew either." Mark Reynolds did not testify. His absence was noted, quietly but pointedly. The defense argued emotional collapse. A man pushed past his breaking point by betrayal, exhaustion, and shock. They described Jacob as a provider who lost control for minutes after years of restraint. But restraint, the prosecution reminded the jury, does not excuse violence. After closing arguments, the jury disappeared behind closed doors. Jacob waited. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the ticking clock on the wall. When the jury returned, no one looked at him. The verdict was read aloud. Guilty. Jacob did not react. He didn't lower his head or close his eyes. He simply exhaled, as if releasing the last breath of a life that no longer belonged to him. The road had ended. What remained was consequence. Sentencing came weeks later, but the damage had already settled into permanence. Jacob stood as the judge read the terms slowly, deliberately, years of prison time measured out in numbers that felt unreal. Each sentence landed with quiet finality. There would be no going home, no driving another mile, no rebuilding what had been destroyed in a single night. When it was over, Jacob was led away without looking back. Prison stripped time of its meaning. Days blurred into routine, count, meals, silence. The road that once gave Jacob purpose was replaced by concrete walls and locked doors. At night, sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the echo of impact that replayed without warning. The sound of wood breaking, glass shattering, an engine screaming before going quiet. Emily left Mill Creek within a month. She sold the house at a loss and moved closer to her family, carrying a weight that followed her everywhere. People whispered. Some blamed her. Others pitied her. None of it brought relief. The marriage was over long before the crash, but the crash ensured it would define her forever. Mark Reynolds never moved back into the house. The structure was deemed unsafe and demolished entirely. Where the living room once stood, there was only an empty lot, dirt packed flat, grass slow to grow. Mark relocated quietly, avoiding attention, avoiding questions. His life continued, but never comfortably. Neighbors drove past the empty space every day. Some slowed down. Some looked away. Mill Creek returned to routine, but the calm felt fragile now. Doors locked earlier. Lights turned off later. The town had learned something it couldn't forget, that violence didn't always come from strangers, and tragedy didn't always announce itself loudly.